In this video, we examine the treats of a wonderful October weekend forecast and look at the tricks that the weather will provide us early next week. Next at the Weather Farm. Welcome to the Weather Farm, and these are your weather headlines for Thursday, October 24th, 2024. The trick-or-treat weather has a treat of beautiful weather and warm temperatures across most of the United States. The trick part is next week's weather. We will see severe storms and snowfall somewhere from the mountains across the central plains, where is to be determined. And is there anything going on down in the tropics? You may have heard some chatter on social media about a potential hurricane. We'll dive into what we can expect in the tropics in the coming week. So let's jump right into our U.S. drought monitor. This was updated today and released at 8 a.m. We see most of the central part of the United States is under a severe drought, moderate drought. We even have pockets of red, which indicates extreme drought. We have those in parts of West Virginia and Ohio. These brown areas are exceptional drought, and we see them in southwestern Texas. We even see a few bits here in Ohio as well. Not much precipitation is expected this upcoming weekend, but if we look at future radar, we do see some rain that's moving through Illinois and Indiana this evening. That will provide a little bit of precipitation, not a lot, maybe 1/10 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch of precipitation at most. And if we look at our 8 to 14 day outlook for precipitation, again, looking in that upper left-hand corner, this is centered on the first week of November. We see a larger than normal chance of above precipitation from Texas into Oklahoma into Kansas. Slightly less chance, but still above normal precipitation is expected around Missouri, into the Great Lakes region, and into the far northeast. Even you down in Florida, you have a chance of experiencing above normal precipitation during that first week of November. If we take a look at our hazards here across the United States for our Thursday evening, it's pretty quiet around the country. We do have a dense fog advisory for the parishes of Louisiana and a few counties in West Texas. We do have some freeze warnings in northwestern Colorado and a couple of severe thunderstorm watches here, parts of Iowa and Missouri. Again, as I mentioned, it's not a very active weather pattern tonight, other than that rain that is moving through Illinois and Indiana and parts of Wisconsin. So let's take a look at what we're going to look at for next week. This weekend, we know we're going to have pretty good temperatures, pretty seasonal weather across most there, but it's next week that where our focus is talking. And when we look at what might happen in the forecast, we start to look at the layers of the atmosphere. So we're going to start at the very top where the jet stream resides, about 300 millibars, and we're going to work our way down to the 500 millibar chart, which I've shown here, and we're going to work our way down into the lower levels and see what happens here at the surface. So let's jump right up into the tops of the atmosphere. We're going to go up to the jet stream, and we see the jet stream is pretty zonal for this time of year, flowing from west to east. But then we start to see, as we get into this weekend, we see a little bit of a dip here in the northeast. That is going to allow cooler weather to come in for the northeast, even provide them a chance of snow across parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And we see this ridge building out in the east. It moves across the plains, and we get a huge ridge of high pressure across the central part of the country. And we see another dip here across the northwest. And this is the one that I want to watch at. We are at Monday in the afternoon. We see a positively tilted trough. We see the most intense winds on the eastern side of that trough, which means that trough is not going to develop, but it is going to move across the plains and across the northern parts into Minnesota. It is going to lose a little bit of its steam as it moves across the plains, but it's still going to provide an opportunity for snowfall and rain across our area. So let's take it one level down. This is the 500 millibar. This is where we tend to look at this one to kind of see where the areas of high pressure and low pressure will be. Again, here's that ridge building across the central plains, reaching way up into the provinces of Canada. And here's that trough that's digging across the western part into our Monday into our Tuesday. It kind of flattens out as that ridge of high pressure is in firm control across the eastern half of the United States. And for our Halloween, we see another one starting to come onto the northwestern shore. So then let's look at our weather, our surface level here, what we see at the ground. So we see that precipitation moving out of the Great Lakes region on our Thursday night into our Friday. Here's that low pressure that I mentioned with that trough digging across the northeast. It's going to provide initially rain that will transition to a little bit of snow, especially at those higher elevations into our Sunday. Parts of Maine could see 2 to 4 inches. Stay tuned for those further amounts. And then we see here on Monday, we start to see that trough digging here in the west. As that low comes on shore, it digs down into parts of Nevada, into the Four Corners region, and then emerges as a deep 997 low, and then it tracks through Kansas into Nebraska into Minnesota as it makes its way off into Ontario by the middle of next week. But behind it, we have another line of storms that will develop. All of this is still to be determined. The exact tracks and paths and types of precipitation are still to be determined because a lot of this energy is just based upon computer model guidance. A lot of it, we won't know for sure exactly the paths until it gets closer and those systems get on shore. So let's just take a look at what some precipitation could be. Again, when we look here, this is Monday night into Tuesday morning. We see that most of the precipitation is in the northeast. We see a little bit of precipitation. Again, this is what fell tonight into early on Friday. And then we see a little bit of precipitation across the northeast. As we move into our Wednesday, we see that precipitation now falls down into Ohio, parts of Colorado, especially the state of Wyoming and southern Montana. Even northwestern New Mexico and eastern Arizona are getting into some precipitation. Not really a lot, anything in the eastern half of the United States. As we move towards Halloween, we see again, that's where the precipitation generally resides. But then we have this swath that's coming up from Kansas into Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, into Minnesota. That is that line of severe weather that one model predicted could be in play on the 30th and 31st. And here's our snowfall totals. Again, from today into Monday night, here's where I say that we could have some snowfall across Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And of course, we're going to have snow across the mountains of the west and into British Columbia. 40 inches of snow is possible. But then into Tuesday, into Wednesday, that snow, as that low is here in the Four Corners region, it's deepening at 997 millibars. We could see widespread snow across parts of Wyoming into the mountains of Colorado. That then shifts a little bit east on Wednesday into our Halloween. And we do start to see a little bit of snow, maybe possibly for the Arrowhead of Minnesota, into Ontario, and up towards the Hudson Bay. So all of this will bear watching over the next several days. Check back on Sunday night when we should have a better handle of what's the exact track of this weather pattern to start your next week. We look at our temperatures again. As I mentioned, a lot of this is going to impact what type of precipitation we see. So this is Monday evening. 0Z represents about 8 p.m. Eastern time. So we see 80s and 90s across most of the central plains. That is indicative of the type of weather we're going to see most of the weekend. And if we take this into our Tuesday, we start to see that demarcation here. Very cold, much colder weather has moved in from the north and west. We see temperatures in the low 40s across South Dakota, but just maybe 100, 200 miles to the south and east of parts of eastern Nebraska, temperatures are in the 80s. So when you have these sharp temperature gradients, you definitely are going to have the possibility of seeing some severe weather, and you're going to be generating a lot of wind in this area. So this area along here from Colorado to Nebraska, southeastern South Dakota, southern Minnesota, this is going to be prime area for us to be watching on our Tuesday evening for the potential of severe weather. Then on our Wednesday, that moves slightly east as we see cooler temperatures continuing to move in. So when we look at our wind forecast here, Sorry, I had to get my computer going. We see again on a Monday, this is where we're going to have a lot of wind out across the plains into Missouri, into Iowa, ahead of that frontal system, that storm that's going to come out of Colorado and race up the plains and into Minnesota. So a lot of wind's going to be generated by this system. That's going to help propel those warmer temperatures up into the 80s, as we saw on the temperature map, across most of this area. In fact, most of the Great Lakes could be flirting with potential highs in the 80s early next week, which could break records in some of those areas. But as we see, as we get closer to Halloween, the winds kind of calm down across the central plains. So let's take a look at what's going on down in the tropics. There's been a lot of talk on social media about the tropics, and is Hurricane Patty going to be down there? Well, the National Hurricane Center says that no tropical cyclone activity is expected during the next 7 days. The thing that we do want to watch is a lot of models are picking this particular area here as the place where something might develop. Now, I'll be honest with you, the data that I've seen, if something does develop, some has it going straight across Cuba, some has it coming over towards the Dominican, some has going to the Yucatan. There is probably, for the 50 models, there's probably 50 different solutions for where this storm will go at this time. No particular model can be relied upon as having the exact track of where something will develop, and if it does develop, where that storm will go. But the thing that has it working for it is you need sea surface temperatures of at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's about 24 degrees Celsius. And really, across most of the Gulf, we're in those mid to upper 20 degrees Celsius temperatures. And down here in the Western Caribbean, we have sea surface temperatures around 30 degrees Celsius. So plenty of energy available for if something were to develop. But again, as more and more models will run over the next several days, as we get closer to the first part of November and we get a better handle of what's going on, what are the weather patterns, will there be a cold front that kind of helps suppress something, or what will happen? Stay tuned here at the Weather Farm for your latest information. And as I mentioned, let's just look at our weather for this upcoming weekend. We have high pressure and control over the plains on our Friday. We have a little disturbance in Ontario that's going to sweep through and clip the northern part of the United States into Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont over the weekend, bringing initially rain and some snow for that. But out west, it is completely clear and pleasant conditions for this time of the year. Even the areas of British Columbia and the Northwest that have been receiving a lot of precipitation are free from that on our Friday. Now on our Saturday, we start to see moisture streaming back on shore with some rain in Washington and some snow up in British Columbia. That high that was over the Central Plains moves across to the Great Lakes, providing good weather. An area of unsettled weather here across eastern Tennessee and northwestern South Carolina could bring a few sprinkles, and a few sprinkles up in the northeast as well. Then for on our Sunday, that high that was in the Great Lakes moves to the mid-Atlantic. We have a little bit more precipitation across the northwest with rain, and then in higher elevations, those mountain snows. Along the coast, it's going to be a beautiful weekend there for any kind of beach activities that you would like to do this last weekend of October. Temperatures this weekend are also going to be very comfortable and above average for this time of the year. Again, this is our Friday temperature. So we see widespread 80s and 90s across parts of Texas, into Louisiana, into Mississippi and Alabama. We see 40s and 50s in the northeast, 50s across the northern plains, and the desert southwest is in the low 90s. The Intermountain West has temperatures in the 40s and 50s on our Friday. Looking ahead to our Saturday temperatures, we see pretty much a repeat pattern of what we see on our Friday. And we see those 80s and 90s maybe just a little bit more suppressed down further towards the coastline than what we saw on our Friday. We have a little bit of a dip here in the Great Lakes with temperatures in the 50s. If you remember from the surface map, we had that trough digging in across the northeast. In fact, parts of Maine could be stuck in the 30s for most of your Saturday. And then it's warming up in advance of that high pressure building across the central plains for this upcoming week. Temperatures warming well into the 70s and 80s across most of Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. The same is true for our Sunday. We see that warmth moving all the way up into Alberta and Saskatchewan, with temperatures there reaching the 50s and 60s, 70s and 80s across the Central Plains. The Northeast and the Great Lakes and areas east, a little bit cooler, temperatures in the 40s and 50s. And again, Maine, you're going to be pretty cool this weekend with temperatures in the 30s and 40s. Texas, you remain hot with temperatures in the 90s across most of your area. Even down toward the Rio Grande, we could be flirting with maybe 95 to 100 degrees in some spots. In our temperature outlook after this weekend into the first part of November, repeats a pattern we've seen most of October. Most of the country is seeing above normal temperatures for the first full week of November. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this look at your weekend forecast and the upcoming week here at the Weather Farm. Like and subscribe. Share this with your friends. If you found it helpful, leave us a comment. We want to know the things that you want to hear about here at the Weather Farm. We appreciate your support, and we hope you have an awesome weekend.